Pilgrims Progress by John Bunyan. Chapter 1, The City of Destruction.
This is the story of a disturbing dream. It began in the City of Destruction. In that doomed place lived a man called Christian. One day, deeply distressed, his shoulders bowed under the weight of a huge burden, Christian stood outside his house reading a book, whose contents made him weep and tremble. From time to time, he would cry out, "What shall I do?" Eventually, he turned and entered his home. For a time, he managed to behave normally in front of his wife and children, but at last he broke down, and he told them of his despair. "This burden is crippling me," he began, "and I'm also tormented by the knowledge that our city will be burnt and all of us with it unless we find a way to escape." At these words, Christian's family stared incredulously at him. Then, concluding that the poor man was ill, they put him to bed. But Christian could not sleep, and by morning he was more miserable than ever. His relatives did everything possible to drive away his gloom. They tried scolding, teasing, ignoring him even. But none of these efforts succeeded. Bowed by his burden, Christian spent his time alone, either weeping and praying in his room or pacing the countryside studying his book. At last one day, halfway across a wide field, he came to a halt and cried out in despair, "What must I do to be saved?" As if in answer to his question. Seeing this, Christian begged the old man to tell him where he should run. In reply, Evangelist pointed into the distance. "Do you see that wicket gate?" "No." "Well then, do you see the shining light?" "I think I do." "Keep walking at that light and go on walking towards it until you see the gate. Approach it and knock." At these words, a ray of hope penetrated Christian's despair, and he began to run, in spite of his huge burden, towards the light. Come back to us," his wife and children and their neighbours implored him. But Christian put his hands over his ears and quickened his pace, shouting, "Life, eternal life." Obstinate and Pliable, two of Christian's neighbours, not content with shouting after him, decided to follow him and bring him back by force. They soon caught him up. "Why have you come?" Christian demanded. "To persuade you to return with us," they replied. "I can't do that," Christian insisted. "The city of destruction is doomed. So are we if we stay there. Why don't you come with me?" "What, and leave our friends and comforts behind?" asked Obstinate in astonishment. "They are nothing compared with all the joys ahead of us," answered Christian eagerly. "What joys?" demanded Obstinate. "A heavenly home and city," Christian explained. "A place that's pure and perfect and will last forever." Pointing to his book, he added, "You can read about it here." "Bother your book," said Obstinate testily. "Will you return with us or not?" "I will not," answered Christian decisively. "Come, Pliable," said Obstinate, turning away from Christian. "Let's leave this conceited, stubborn fellow and return home." But Pliable answered, "What if Christian's hopes are true? I feel inclined to go along with him." Then Obstinate urged his neighbour to go back to the city of destruction with him, and Christian invited him to go on to Mount Zion. Pliable hesitated, then came to a decision. "I'll take my chance with Christian," he said. "In that case, I'll go home," declared Obstinate. "I refuse to stay with a couple of deluded fools." At this, stubborn gentleman turned and headed for the city of destruction. Christian and Pliable walked side by side in the direction of the light. Happy at having found a companion, Christian talked eagerly to Pliable about the joys ahead of them. In the eternal city to which we are travelling live God and his angels, as well as martyrs and other pilgrims, he said. The travellers were so engrossed in conversation that they did not notice until it was too late the boggy ground that lay across their path. Soon both men were wallowing waist-high in the mud and the filth of a swamp called the Slough of Despond. Pliable by nature, easily discouraged, struggled to reach the bank. Reproaching Christian with the words, "Is this the joy you promised me? I dread to think what dangers lie ahead. If I get out of this bog alive, you can go on alone to your precious city." Regaining the safety of the nearside bank, Pliable headed for the city of destruction, leaving his companion to flounder in the swamp, whose boggy condition was maintained by the fears and doubts of those who became conscious of their sins. Here Christian might have remained, but for the aid of a man called Help, who took his hand and pulled him clear. Grateful to be on the right road again, the muddy pilgrim trudged on towards the light. Before long, he met another traveller, worldly wise man from the town of worldly wisdom near the city of destruction. "Where are you going, weary traveller?" Worldly wise man greeted Christian. "To the gate, to be freed from my burden," was the reply. "Who told you to go this way?" "Evangelist." "I might have known," snorted worldly wise man. "This is a dangerous route. You have already encountered the Slough of Despond. If you continue on this road, you will face weariness, pain, dragons, and darkness, death, and many other dangers." "But my burden is worse than any of the things you've mentioned," insisted Christian. "And how did you acquire your burden in the first place?" "By reading this book." "Meddling in matters beyond one's understanding always leads to confusion and despair," admonished worldly wise man. "But I can show you an easier way to find release. In the nearby village of Morality lives a man called Legality, and his charming son Civility. They are such good people. Legality will soon remove your load, and then you can send for your family and settle down to live a decent moral life among honest neighbours." Christian hesitated, then said, "Show me the way to this good man's house." Worldly wise man gave clear directions. "See that high hill?" he asked, pointing away from the path. "Go past it and you will see Morality Village. The first house belongs to Legality." Hopefully at first, Christian approached the hill, but as soon as he came closer to it, he feared that the overhanging ridge would fall on him. This fear and the apparent increased weight of his burden made the pilgrim stand still. In the state of perplexity, he looked up and saw flames erupting from the hillside. At this, Christian broke out in a cold sweat and shook with fear, regretting that he had followed bad advice and ashamed that Evangelist, whom he now saw rapidly approaching, should find him there. Coming up to Christian, Evangelist asked sternly, "What are you doing here?" The pilgrim admitted that he had listened to the words of worldly wise man. "Now listen to God's words," Evangelist commanded. "He says he cannot delight in one who turns aside from the way of truth." Overcome by shame and fear, Christian sank to the ground, but his guide quickly lifted him up and reassured him, "God will forgive all sin, so you must not doubt, but believe." Then Christian listened humbly as Evangelist explained why worldly wise man was an enemy, Legality a cheat, and Civility a hypocrite. Worldly wise man is only wise in the ways of the world. He wants to turn men away from the road that leads to the cross, directing them to the path that leads to death. You must reject all his false advice. As for legality, he cannot remove your load. He has never freed anyone from the burden of sin. Indeed, he cannot, since no one ever succeeds in fulfilling all the law's demands throughout his life. Having spoken, Evangelist called on heaven to verify his words. Immediately flames spurted from the hill, and a voice thundered, "Those who depend on the law are under a curse." Overcome with remorse, Christian asked fearfully, "Is there any hope for me? Will my sin be forgiven?" "You have failed," agreed Evangelist, "but the man at the gate will welcome you, for he wishes everyone well. Only don't turn aside again from the right way." The wise guide then embraced the pilgrim and, smiling, wished him Godspeed. With renewed courage and determination, Christian strode forward, glancing neither right nor left. On reaching the wicket gate, he stopped and read the words above it, "Knock, and it shall be opened unto you." Trembling with excitement, dirt and tiredness forgotten, the traveller raised a hand and knocked.